The HOA president didn't just slap me with a $5,000 fine for having an unsightly garden. She secretly poisoned the roses my dying wife cherished most, tried to snatch away my $750,000 inheritance, and even attempted arson to destroy the place where my wife wanted her ashes laid to rest. But when federal archaeologists later declared that very garden a protected historic landmark valued at $500,000, I made sure her entire criminal operation collapsed in the most dramatic way imaginable. Picture this: my wife Sarah, frail from cancer, holding my trembling hands in that cold, sterile hospital room. The sharp smell of disinfectant hung in the air as she whispered her final wish. "Bring my grandmother's garden back to life, Marcus. Promise me my ashes will be there, mingled with the soil where love has bloomed for generations." Dead. "People don't need gardens, Marcus." That's what Delilah Thornfield sneered 8 months later, her perfectly polished nails tapping on my doorframe. "Time to accept reality and sell." What she didn't realize was that Sarah's ashes were already feeding those sacred roses, and I was about to turn Delilah's greed into a federal offense. So let me ask you, what would you do if someone tried to desecrate your spouse's resting place for profit? Drop a comment below. How far would you go to defend real love? My name is Marcus Hartwell, and at 52 years old, I thought I already knew what loss meant. 8 months ago, cancer took Sarah from me, leaving an empty home haunted by her laughter, and a promise I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep. But Sarah was more than my soulmate. She had a sharp mind that saw through deception long before I could. Even as her body weakened, she spent hours digging into our property's history, uncovering something that would change everything. My grandmother, Rosalind, hadn't just left me a house. She'd left a carefully laid legal safeguard worth $750,000. "Marcus," Sarah whispered one afternoon, her thin fingers trembling as she held up faded legal documents. The comforting trace of her vanilla perfume was already being overtaken by the clinical odor of medical equipment. "Your grandmother was smarter than anyone realized. This garden, it isn't just about beauty. There's a trust fund, $750,000, but only if the garden stays intact as a living memorial." She knew someone would try to take it, and that someone was Delilah Thornfield, the same HOA president, who had smiled sweetly at Sarah's funeral while secretly scheming to destroy everything sacred to us. What I didn't know at the time was that Delilah had been plotting for 8 long years, ever since Sarah won the inheritance battle for grandmother's home, a bitter defeat that left Delilah resentful and empty-handed. Both women had been close to my grandmother, but while Sarah lovingly cared for her during her final years, Delilah only saw dollar signs. When the will named Sarah as heir, Delilah's pleasant mask slipped, exposing the ruthless real estate predator beneath. Behind her polished exterior, Delilah ran a hidden empire. Through an LLC buried in complex paperwork, she had been systematically preying on the original homeowners of our street. Eleanor Vance, the kind widow next door, told me how Delilah helped her move into assisted living after sudden spikes in HOA citations. Frank Morrison, a veteran who found peace tending his garden, was forced to sell after mysterious utility shutoffs and unexpected tax hikes. Her scheme was cruel in its precision. Target vulnerable residents, manufacture violations, apply financial pressure, then swoop in with below-market rescue offers through shell companies. Delilah wasn't just running the HOA. She was orchestrating a property theft operation projected to rake in over $12 million in luxury townhouse development. Sarah's passing gave her the opening she'd been waiting for. The day after the funeral, while I was still drowning in grief, she appeared at my doorstep with crocodile tears and a business proposal. "Marcus, darling," she cooed, resting her manicured hand on my arm, though her eyes were busy calculating square footage. "Sarah wouldn't want you burdened with this old place. Maybe it's time to start fresh. I know investors who'd pay cash, help you move on." What she didn't admit was that she was the investor, hiding behind forged documents and shell corporations. Then came the psychological warfare. Anonymous calls to Adult Protective Services, accusing me of losing my mind. Neighbors whispering that my grief had made me unstable. Subtle suggestions that I was too broken to manage my property, or to make sound decisions at all. Then came the destruction of the garden. Sarah's cherished heritage roses, unique, carefully chosen, and ordered for her memorial after weeks of research, were suddenly dead, shriveled overnight. The cause, a mistaken herbicide overspray during the community beautification project that Delilah herself had overseen. Standing in that poisoned soil, brushing my fingers across the withered edges of blooms Sarah had planted only weeks earlier, something fractured deep inside me. This wasn't simple neglect. It wasn't even random vandalism. It was a violation, a desecration of sacred earth where my wife's ashes had been mingled with the soil, nurturing love carried through generations. Then came the $5,000 penalty. 30 days to resolve violations or face legal action. Its deadline landing cruelly on the anniversary of Sarah's death. Delilah's cruelty was deliberate, calculated with surgical precision. Yet as I knelt in that broken garden, inhaling the faint trace of Sarah's lavender and listening to the silence where her wind chimes had once sung, I made a decision that would alter everything. Sarah had left me more than a garden and a promise. She had left me the means to fight. What I didn't realize yet was that following her trail would expose a criminal scheme destined for national headlines. The attack on Sarah's memorial deepened 3 weeks after her roses died. I was kneeling near her chosen granite river rock, the one she loved because it reminded her of our honeymoon in Maine, when Delilah's shadow stretched across the sacred ground where Sarah's ashes nourished new life. "That memorial stone breaks the no religious displays policy, Marcus," she declared, her voice sharp as icy wind. The morning dew made Sarah's stone shimmer like tears, and the lavender's faint perfume clung to the air. "And those wind chimes, noise violation. 24 hours to remove them or face additional fines." My hand clenched against the smooth surface of Sarah's stone. "This isn't religious. It's my wife's grave." Delilah laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "Your wife is gone, Marcus. Cremated remains don't belong in gardens. That's a health code violation. Time to let go and move forward. Sarah wouldn't want you clinging to the past." That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah's wind chimes played softly outside my window, the gentle notes that had carried me through 8 long months of grief. By morning, they were gone, cut away with precision, leaving sharp metal edges that sliced my skin when I touched them. But Delilah had miscalculated. Her cruelty had roused something grief had kept buried, my analytical mind. Sarah always said, I became a detective when something caught my attention, chasing every thread until the truth surfaced. I began with Eleanor Vance, who lived 3 houses down in the home her family had owned for over a century. Over steaming chamomile tea, its scent a mirror of Sarah's evening ritual, Eleanor revealed the pattern I had been too broken to recognize. "It started with surprise inspections," she whispered, her trembling hands pouring tea. Violations I'd never even heard of. Window box height limits, mailbox placement rules, cracks in sidewalks. The fines stacked up. $50, then $200, then $500. When she couldn't pay, Delilah suggested moving into assisted living. The bitter taste of realization burned in my throat. "Who bought your house?" I asked. "An investment company." Delilah recommended them, said they were good for the neighborhood. They paid only 60% of what it was worth. Eleanor's voice broke. "I thought she was helping me." That night I pored over property records until my eyes burned from the screen. A clear pattern emerged, like a spreading infection. Vulnerable homeowners, arbitrary violations, forced sales far below market value, funneled into the same cluster of LLCs. Delilah wasn't just corrupt. She was orchestrating a systematic exploitation scheme targeting the elderly, and she wasn't done with me. Anonymous reports began to rain down on every agency imaginable. The IRS received tips about my inheritance, demanding audits of Sarah's trust. Credit agencies got false debt claims. My mortgage company was warned about supposed drops in property value. Utility companies received complaints of unpaid bills, sparking threats of service shutoff. Even the health department came to investigate unsanitary burial practices, tearing through Sarah's memorial garden with cold hands. The cruelest strike came when I found Sarah's hidden notes behind my grandmother's jewelry box. Her familiar handwriting filled page after page of legal documentation, recording Delilah's suspicious behavior throughout Sarah's illness. She had known. Even while fighting cancer, my brilliant wife had seen the predator circling. "Marcus," her final note read, "if you're reading this, something's happened to me, and Delilah is making her move. The garden preservation requirement isn't just sentiment, it's legal protection. The trust fund can defend us, but only if you keep the memorial intact. I've documented her conversations about pushing you to move on. Don't let her steal what 3 generations built with love. Always research who benefits from your compliance. Predators often disguise theft as help." Her words struck like ice water over flame. While I had been focused on her care, Sarah had been building a case. She saw what I couldn't. The smiling woman at her funeral was already circling like a vulture. That night, Delilah escalated. I woke not to the gentle tones of Sarah's wind chimes, but to their terrible absence. Racing outside barefoot, dew soaking my pajamas, I found the copper tubes scattered through the garden like broken bones. Sarah's River Rock Memorial had been shifted for compliance, no longer marking the sacred soil where her ashes rested. Standing in that violated space, breathing in the scent of torn earth and crushed lavender, something inside me hardened. Grief crystallized into a cold, unyielding resolve. Sarah had armed me with the tools to fight, and Delilah had just declared war on sacred ground. The predator had awakened prey that refused to flee. In the gray pre-dawn, Officer Martinez's radio crackled as he stood in my desecrated garden, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist scented faintly with Sarah's lavender. He shifted uncomfortably, watching me kneel beside the disturbed stone. "Sir, we had a call from a worried neighbor about some unusual behavior," he said gently. "They reported you were speaking to someone who wasn't there." My throat tightened in shame. This was Delilah's masterstroke, turning my grief rituals into supposed proof of madness. For 8 months straight, every morning, I had knelt in the garden to read Sarah her favorite poems, sharing memories and little updates with the woman, whose ashes nourished the soil at my feet. I was reading to my wife's memorial, I explained, forcing my voice to stay even despite the anger burning in my chest. Her ashes are part of this ground. It's how I process grief, not a sign of illness. Officer Martinez gave me a sympathetic nod and left without pressing the issue, but the harm was done. By midday, Delilah's circle had twisted the wellness. "Check into a weapon." Certified mail arrived, heavy with the authority of court seals. Her attorney, conveniently also her golfing partner, had filed a petition questioning whether I was mentally competent to serve as trustee of my grandmother's $750,000 estate. The motion claimed my devotion to the garden and my conversations. With Sarah proved I couldn't handle financial matters responsibly. The legal scheme was chilling in its precision, forced the court to appoint a trustee for my protection, who would almost certainly recommend selling the property as a supposed therapeutic measure. But Sarah had taught me to keep records. Ever since the rose poisoning incident, I'd been documenting every encounter, building a timeline of harassment. My phone held hours of Delilah's calculated cruelty, her real motives peeking out beneath the veneer of concern. Here's a truth, worth holding on to: grief is not the same as mental illness. I sought immediate documentation of my stability from professionals who understood bereavement. Sarah's oncologist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had guided us through Sarah's last months, wrote a formal statement describing my mourning rituals as a healthy form of healing. Her letter became a blade of truth, cutting through Delilah's psychological games. Meanwhile, Delilah staged a neighborhood intervention and conveniently didn't invite me. Eleanor, still burdened with guilt over losing her own property, slipped in quietly and later told me what she heard. "She made you sound dangerous," Eleanor whispered, trembling as we sat in her small, assisted living apartment, which smelled more of disinfectant than the bread she once baked. "Said your place is dragging down property values. Said you might hurt yourself or someone else." The campaign of isolation worked with surgical efficiency. Grocery couriers stopped delivering. Mail carriers flagged my address as a concern. Even the neighbor's teenage son, who used to help with yard work, suddenly vanished after his parents absorbed Delilah's warnings. Then came the cruelest escalation, a threat to destroy Sarah's memorial oak. A work crew rolled in, claiming emergency removal for safety reasons. Chainsaws roared like predators circling the century-old tree that shaded Sarah's resting place. Losing it would have shattered the garden's microclimate, wiping out the rare heritage plants Sarah had carefully chosen for our memorial. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a calculated attempt to erase the living sanctuary where her ashes had fostered new life. Trembling but resolute, I planted myself between the buzzing saws and Sarah's tree, the scent of morning glory vines she had once planted mixing with the stench of diesel. This tree is healthy, it's not a danger, and you don't have the authority to cut it, I said firmly. The crew chief, uneasy, admitted they'd been hired by concerned neighbors, but had no official paperwork. They backed off, for now. But I knew this was only reconnaissance before a bigger strike. That evening, a surprising ally reached out. Helen Martinez, the elderly city archivist, called with excitement, crackling in her voice like dry autumn leaves. "Marcus, I've been looking into your property's history after hearing rumors of the dispute. You need to see this." Her discovery stopped me cold. "Documents from the 1920s prove your grandmother's garden has historic significance," she said. "Marcus, your grandmother Rosalind wasn't just tending flowers. She was the town's first female botanist. Some of the plants in your garden trace back to the 1887 estate of the town's founders. They could be genetically unique, living links to our agricultural past." Her words struck like lightning, revealing a truth far greater than revenge. Sarah had been guiding me toward something bigger all along. My wife's uncanny instinct about the garden's value went far beyond simple inheritance. She seemed to know, almost instinctively, that this sacred ground carried hidden powers, protection strong enough to withstand any legal strike. The predator didn't yet realize she had chosen prey guarded by the weight of history itself. The notice of adverse possession arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as the fragrance of Sarah's memorial roses filled the air, more vivid, more alive than ever, as though her spirit itself was preparing for the fight ahead. Delilah's newest legal assault was a masterpiece of deception. She claimed that a decade of maintaining the strip of land between our homes gave her rightful ownership of the portion of the garden where Sarah's ashes lay. The falsified evidence was bold in its precision: receipts for landscaping work, photographs of her tending the memorial, and neighbor testimonies that she, not I, had cared for the space while my grandmother faded and I supposedly neglected it. But her cruelest move struck at the holiest part of all, Sarah's resting place. State regulators were suddenly flooded with reports accusing me of unlawful burial practices. Officials from the health department arrived demanding proof that Sarah's remains had been properly laid to rest, threatening me with criminal charges for desecration if I couldn't provide documentation. I stood in my kitchen clutching Sarah's cremation certificate, watching them photograph her memorial as though it were a crime scene. In that moment, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about land theft anymore. This was grave robbery masked as red tape. That was when I made the move that shifted everything. I'd hired Miguel Santos, a private investigator with a predator's instincts, sharp and relentless. Within 3 days, he tracked Delilah's dealings through a maze of shell corporations and unearthed a pattern that made her attack on me. "Look small. Marcus, you need to see this," Miguel said, spreading files across my dining table, the same table where Sarah and I once mapped out garden weekends. The papers carried the smell of fresh ink and justice. 15 nearby homes had all been sold under market value to companies tied back to Delilah's LLC network. She had been perfecting this scheme for over 10 years. The evidence was staggering. Orchestrated harassment of elderly owners, calculated violations to push them into financial collapse, and a complicit mortgage broker who swooped in with solutions when fines became unbearable. Delilah's attack on me wasn't personal. It was part of a multi-million-dollar elder exploitation racket. But once my story broke, the narrative shifted. Enter Sarah Morin, an investigative journalist with eyes that missed nothing. She recognized the bigger story beyond one widower's grief. Her angle cut straight to the public's heart. HOA president targets grieving widower. Memorial Garden at center of property theft battle. When her article went live, complete with photos of Sarah's roses and quotes from her letters about the garden's meaning, the tide turned. Sympathy surged. Donations poured in to cover. Legal costs. Survivors of similar HOA abuses began to speak out. My lawyer, Miguel Santos, not the investigator this time, but a civil rights attorney with fire in his chest, unleashed a sweeping counterattack. A restraining order against HOA harassment was only the start. Civil rights claims for discrimination against the grieving, protected under federal disability law, fraud charges for the adverse possession scheme, and emotional distress suits. For desecrating a memorial created a storm of litigation. The awakening around me was astonishing. Neighbors, once convinced by Delilah's lies about my mental state, finally heard the truth, that Sarah's ashes had been gently mingled with the garden soil she loved. Eleanor began organizing prayer gatherings. Clergy denounced the violation of sacred burial ground. Even arguments about property values collapsed when residents realized a historic designation would raise their investments. And then came the discovery that lifted our fight onto the national stage. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a state university researcher, arrived with soil kits and a magnifying glass, her excitement bright as morning dew on Sarah's roses. Her voice trembled as she examined the plants. "Marcus, this is extraordinary," she whispered. "These 3 rose varieties were thought to be extinct for half a century. Your garden isn't just historically important, it's a living genetic vault that could transform conservation efforts." University findings confirmed it. The garden qualified for the National Register of Historic Places. Federal protections would override every HOA ordinance, stripping Delilah and her allies of all authority. The scientific breakthrough sparked media frenzy and drew political backing that no amount of money could have purchased. Yet Delilah's financial probe uncovered the full scale of the criminal scheme. Court-subpoenaed bank documents revealed developer funds moving straight into her personal accounts. Hidden tax evasion came to light through undeclared LLC income. Once IRS criminal agents teamed up with federal prosecutors, Delilah's empire began to fracture like ice breaking in the spring thaw. Knowledge note: adverse possession demands clear, continuous, and well-documented use. Safeguards meant to block fraudulent property theft through false maintenance claims. The psychological warfare then escalated to desperate extremes. Delilah hired actors pretending to be mental health experts to stage a bogus intervention at my home, claiming imaginary relatives had requested welfare checks. The gaslighting campaign was carefully crafted to push me into doubting my sanity. But Sarah's careful foresight, combined with the strength of our community, gave me a foundation that couldn't be shaken. As I installed security cameras around Sarah's memorial, their red lights blinking like silent guardian angels in the night, I felt the shift, our turning point. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The ground-penetrating radar pulsed like a mechanical heartbeat as archaeologist Dr. Elena Rodriguez swept it across Sarah's memorial garden, searching for the ideal spot to expand the foundation. What she uncovered instead rewrote everything, not just for me, but for American history itself. "Marcus, stop now," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, her voice trembling with the kind of excitement that can alter careers. On the radar screen appeared unmistakable geometric shapes lying 3 feet below Sarah's favorite roses. "This isn't garden soil," she said. "These are structural remains, stone and mortar, perfectly consistent with 1880s craftsmanship." My chest thundered as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means your memorial garden sits directly on the original 1887 town founder's homestead. This isn't just historically important, it's an archaeological treasure." Her hands shook as she snapped photos of the radar images. By federal law, such sites are immediately protected. Overnight, every single HOA action against me became void. Within hours, my property was declared a controlled archaeological site. Federal officials sealed off the memorial with yellow tape that fluttered like prayer flags in the wind. County leaders showed up with stumbling apologies. State regulators rescinded every citation, every fine, every threat that had haunted me. For months, but the most profound truth waited in Sarah's hidden letter, found tucked inside my grandmother's jewelry box like a message delayed by time itself. Her graceful handwriting filled 3 pages with research that took my breath away. "My beloved Marcus," she wrote, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Delilah has made her move. During sleepless nights spent researching our land, I discovered something." Grandmother's trust wasn't only about preserving a garden, it was her legal safeguard to protect something irreplaceable. The preservation clause was her trap, meant to expose anyone who tried to steal this sacred ground for development. Sarah had known, somehow, even in her battle with cancer, my brilliant wife had sensed the deeper purpose of the land where her ashes would rest. The conspiracy evidence surfaced like buried treasure under federal scrutiny. Miguel's private detective work had traced wrongdoing across 15 HOA-targeted properties, but federal investigators revealed the larger picture, a coordinated fraud ring spanning mortgage brokers, probate lawyers, county officials, and real estate developers. The RICO indictments carried federal sentences heavy enough to shatter lives, just as Delilah had shattered dreams. Through Dr. Rodriguez's scientific study, Sarah's final contribution to conservation history came into focus. DNA tests on the soil in the memorial garden revealed that my wife's ashes had mingled with rare native seeds, creating an environment that preserved genetic material once thought to be gone forever. What began as a tribute had unexpectedly turned into a living research site where love and science fused in ways no one had imagined. The ashes changed the soil's pH and mineral balance, protecting dormant seeds from the original homestead. Dr. Rodriguez explained in a hushed, awed tone. Sarah's remains had not only created a memorial, they had formed a biological time capsule stretching back 140 years in botanical history. Federal recognition of the archaeological find granted. My land immunity from HOA rules, county laws, and state involvement. Historical status brought federal criminal penalties for any interference. Property protections, trust fund security, and Sarah's last wishes now carried the full backing of U.S. law. Within a day, the story ignited national headlines. Environmental organizations embraced our garden as a beacon of conservation success. Legal precedent was set, safeguarding memorial rights against the pressure of development. Sarah's love had become a federal case study in cultural preservation. Here's a key insight. Archaeological discoveries automatically trigger federal protections. That means your property's indigenous and colonial past is shielded by research safeguards before major disputes arise. Standing in that protected soil, inhaling the scent of earth that held centuries of secrets, I understood Sarah's instincts had guided us to something far greater than vengeance. Love had literally safeguarded history, and history in turn would safeguard love for generations ahead. The archaeologist's breathless words still echoed in me. This changes everything. The shift from a modest memorial garden to the center of a federal probe happened with astonishing speed. Within 3 days of Dr. Rodriguez's discovery, my home resembled a small-scale military base. But instead of conquest, we were building a fortress of justice, not only for Sarah's memory, but for countless other victims. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's White-Collar Division established her operations hub in my living room, the same place where Sarah and I once planned weekend projects. Now RICO case files blanketed our dining table as prosecutors assembled charges that could dismantle Delilah's fraudulent empire. The irony was sharp and beautiful. Sarah's home had become the very headquarters for taking down the woman who tried to steal it. 15 defendants so far, Agent Walsh noted, fingers flying over her laptop as daylight streamed through Sarah's lace curtains. Property fraud, elder abuse, mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and now interference with federally protected archaeological sites. We're looking at sentences that start at 25 years. Behind Sarah's roses, the archaeological team established a permanent research station, transforming the backyard into a functioning laboratory. Dr. Elena Rodriguez partnered with the Environmental Protection Agency after finding that 3 plant species growing there represented the last surviving genetic lines of varieties thought extinct. Graduate students arrived daily, writing dissertations in conservation genetics, while Sarah's ashes continued to nourish scientific wonders. Your wife's remains created flawless preservation conditions, said Dr. Patricia Reeves, her voice tinged with awe as she studied soil samples beneath a portable microscope. The cremation ash shifted the soil's minerals in ways that kept these dormant seeds viable for more than a century. This isn't simply a memorial, it's a genetic vault worth millions to environmental science. The media plan soon transformed our local discovery into a nationwide sensation. Filmmaker David Moran began documenting the case for a feature-length film that captured the convergence of love, loss, and ecological justice. Friends of Sarah's Garden grew from a small group of neighbors to over 500 global supporters, while crowdfunding raised more than $150,000 for legal expenses and garden protection. Social platforms erupted, with the hashtag Dansak Sarah's Garden spreading to 2.3 million shares. Book publishers competed with six-figure offers for the rights to our story. The Today Show, 60 Minutes, and National Geographic all sought exclusive interviews. Sarah's quiet devotion had become a worldwide emblem of how one person's courage could protect heritage too precious to lose. Clergy from many different faiths gathered at the memorial, holding prayer vigils and blessing the soil where love itself had safeguarded history. Veterans organizations rallied to our side, holding up our struggle as a stand against institutional intimidation in defense of fallen loved ones. The American Civil Liberties Union submitted an amicus brief arguing for memorial rights over private covenant restrictions. Miguel Santos pulled together a powerhouse legal team that could have been mistaken for a civil rights hall of fame. Federal prosecutors pressed forward with RICO criminal charges, while civil rights lawyers pursued claims of discriminatory targeting. Attorneys specializing in archaeology ensured compliance with preservation laws, and estate lawyers defended the trust fund from renewed attacks. The legal might assembled was staggering, entirely financed by federal asset forfeiture from Delilah's seized accounts. The body of evidence demanded its own storage space. More than 300 hours of surveillance footage documented relentless harassment. Audio files revealed bribes and blatant discrimination. Financial records tied together a web of fraud across multiple states. Expert witnesses, archaeologists, botanists, psychologists, and grief counselors strengthened the case until it was nearly unshakable. Political backing surged faster than anyone expected. State lawmakers introduced Sarah's Law, shielding memorial gardens from HOA harassment. The governor's office issued statements championing preservation against development pressure. Members of Congress condemned patterns of elder abuse, disguised as property management. Federal agencies promised tougher oversight of HOA operations nationwide. The expansion plan for the memorial incorporated archaeological discoveries into a full educational center, honoring Sarah while highlighting the site's historic value. Projections showed $500,000 in yearly tourism revenue benefiting the wider community. The living memorial was set to become both a place of healing and a global example of preservation. Partnerships with universities and international conservation groups led to seed banking programs drawn from our garden's genetic material. Climate adaptation studies would use the memorial as a living lab for plant resilience. Scientific journals were already citing the site as a success story, proof that love could indeed safeguard threatened species. Practical lessons surfaced. Daily, federal archaeological protections overrule all local codes. Land's deep history should be researched before disputes erupt. RICO statutes apply to systematic property fraud when patterns span multiple victims, and crowdfunding can balance the scales against powerful developers. At sunset, standing within Sarah's memorial garden, now surrounded by federal protection signs and scientific equipment, I felt her presence as vividly as ever. The fragrance of her favorite roses carried through the dusk, promising justice. Archaeological grid markers ringed her memorial stone like a constellation of guardians. The bronze plaque we'd placed there bore only the words, "Love preserves all things. Sarah and Marcus forever." The predator had roused prey armored by federal law, scientific significance, and international backing. Delilah's empire was on the verge of collapse under the weight of love transformed into indestructible legal defense. But desperation drives recklessness, and Delilah Thornfield was about to prove that in spectacular fashion. Just 3 days after federal protections were secured, she hired Tommy "The Torch" Martinez, an arsonist infamous for insurance jobs and utterly indifferent to sacred ground. My security cameras caught every incriminating detail in crystal clarity. At 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Thursday, Tommy crept through my yard carrying accelerant and matches. Motion sensors tracked his movements, instantly alerting both me and the FBI surveillance teams already shadowing Delilah's every move. The plot was chilling in its precision. Torch the memorial during a staged electrical fire, erasing archaeological evidence, Sarah's ashes, and irreplaceable plant material in one devastating blaze. The cover story would frame me for negligence while conveniently stripping away federal protections and scientific value. But Delilah's phone calls had been monitored ever since the RICO indictment. Agents had recorded her giving Tommy explicit orders. Make it look like an accident, but burn it all. The memorial, the plants, the soil, everything keeping that bastard protected. At 2:45 a.m., Agent Walsh's voice came through my phone. "Marcus, stay inside. We've got eyes on him. Federal marshals are in position." From my window, I saw red laser dots dancing across Tommy's chest as he doused Sarah's roses with gasoline. Their sweet fragrance was seconds away from turning to funeral smoke. He never struck the match. Federal agents burst from hiding, wrestling him to the ground just feet from Sarah's stone. The reek of gasoline mixed with lavender left me nauseated, a bitter reminder of how close we had come to losing everything sacred. Within hours, the charges grew from attempted arson to attempted murder when investigators found the gas line. Our home had been tampered with. An explosion would have killed me along with destroying the historic site. Prosecutors later added domestic terrorism to the list since the attack targeted a federally protected location, yet Delilah's descent didn't stop there. When physical destruction failed, she turned to psychological warfare. Her new weapon was blackmail, aimed at severing my ties with the very community that had embraced Sarah's memory. "I'll expose your illegal burial to every media outlet," she snarled in a recorded call that investigators later played back. "For me. I'll sue the cemetery where Sarah should have been laid to rest. I'll rally every religious group against your twisted cremation, and I'll brand you a fraud who desecrates graves." Her threats revealed the true depth of her obsession, a burning need to erase Sarah's memory entirely. This was no longer just about stealing property. It had turned into an attempt to erase every trace of love that had inspired federal protection for a priceless past. The community documentation plan I created became essential. Every single threat was logged, time-stamped, and delivered to federal investigators, building an airtight case for punitive damages. Dr. Walsh's mental health evaluation confirmed my stability despite grief, dismantling Delilah's claims about my supposed instability. Delilah's next desperate tactic was property value sabotage. She spread false claims that archaeological restrictions would block future improvements, driving down neighborhood investments. Anonymous flyers circulated warning that federal oversight would trigger higher taxes and construction limits that would ruin the neighborhood forever. But the smear campaign collapsed when tourism forecasts projected $500,000 a year from visitors drawn to our historic site. Instead of dropping, property values climbed as the designation attracted national coverage and federal preservation funding. For the entire district, her intimidation escalated into outright terrorism. Anonymous death threats appeared at Sarah's memorial, printed on paper, later traced by forensics back to Delilah's own printer. Fake legal notices claiming federal property seizure were left on my doorstep, designed to provoke panic and mistakes. When her harassment reached my remaining friends and distant relatives, federal investigators identified it as a clear pattern of witness intimidation, a crime on multiple counts. Private investigators she hired to dig up dirt on my past found nothing worse than late library books and a college parking fine. Yet even that intrusion qualified as criminal harassment under victim protection laws. Delilah's final play was political pressure. With help from developer allies, she pushed city council members to pass emergency zoning exemptions that would override federal protection. Bribes were dangled before archaeologists willing to downplay the site's value. County officials received threats about lost tax revenue if oversight continued. Federal investigators infiltrated these meetings, recording each bribery attempt, adding corruption charges to her mounting crimes. When she tried to pay off a county assessor with $50,000 to falsify reports, FBI cameras captured her entire pitch word for word. The violence peaked on Sarah's birthday. I woke to the crash of breaking stone. Delilah herself had taken a sledgehammer. To Sarah's memorial, shrieking insults about the dead not deserving gardens, while federal surveillance documented her full psychological collapse. Standing in the wreckage, clutching shards of Sarah's destroyed marker as sirens wailed, I felt something heavy settle inside me. The predator had finally revealed herself completely, and justice was closing in with federal force and community. Rage, backing every legal strike. The FBI's sting operation played out like a chess match. Delilah had already lost, yet refused to see checkmate. Special Agent Walsh briefed me at my kitchen table, Sarah's coffee mug still in the sink, as though she might walk in any moment to plan the garden. "We're deploying Agent Rodriguez," Walsh explained, her voice edged with satisfaction, like a hunter poised to spring the trap. "She'll pose as a crooked city official willing to accidentally damage the archaeological site during inspection. Delilah's desperation makes her reckless. She'll incriminate herself trying to destroy what she can't take." The sting was set at the city planning office, neutral ground where permits were issued and bribes quietly exchanged. Agent Rodriguez, posing as Commissioner Maria Santos, wore hidden recording equipment to capture every detail of Delilah's last crime. "I can arrange a water main break that floods the dig site," Rodriguez offered smoothly, her voice calibrated to sound like practiced corruption. "Soil disturbed, evidence destroyed, federal oversight compromised. 50 grand in cash makes the paperwork vanish." Delilah's response was instant and damning. "Make it 60 and make sure the memorial area is obliterated. I want every trace of that bitch's ashes flushed into the storm drain where they belong." Prosecutors later told me those words sealed her fate. Desecrating human remains combined with bribing federal officials carried mandatory minimums that would keep Delilah locked away until she was far too old to menace anyone's sacred ground. But her breaking point provided the most damning evidence of all. Once she realized the investigation threatened not just her freedom, but her entire identity as a so-called community leader, she attempted what officials later classified as suicide by cop at Sarah's memorial garden. It happened at sunset, golden, light filtering through the protected oak tree. Delilah arrived with a gas can and matches. Security cameras recorded her unraveling completely as she screamed accusations, exposing the true depths of her obsession. "Marcus had stolen everything I had ever worked for," she screamed, scattering accelerant over federal boundary markers, as police units closed in around the dig site. "That garden was meant to be mine. Sarah should have died nameless and forgotten. I've crushed people far stronger than her." Her tirade, captured live from news helicopters circling above, handed prosecutors a psychological profile that explained 8 relentless years of elder exploitation. This wasn't simple property fraud. It was an obsessive drive to erase others' happiness and replace it with her warped vision of success. The community prepared for a showdown without delay. Eleanor scheduled a town hall for the next evening, expecting more than 800 people, federal officials, reporters, and archaeological teams ready to announce the site's extraordinary role in world history. Presenting evidence required federal collaboration with international scientific bodies. DNA tests had shown Sarah's memorial contained genetic traces from indigenous people more than 10,000 years old. Our garden was not only archaeologically important but anthropologically priceless, offering insight into the earliest settlement of North America. Cremation ashes, Dr. Rodriguez explained, had created perfect preservation conditions, protecting organic material that had survived since the Ice Age. Sarah's memorial had unknowingly safeguarded human DNA, plant genomes, and soil microbes that mapped an unbroken thread of life stretching back millennia. Its research value was estimated at over $10 million, shifting our neighborhood dispute into an international conservation priority. A UNESCO preliminary review suggested potential World Heritage status, federal protection that could never be. Undone. The legal victory was sweeping. Property disputes were permanently resolved under federal archaeological protection. Trust funds were secured through international scientific support. Criminal conspiracy charges guaranteed freedom from future harassment. Civil judgments awarded more than $1.2 million in damages, funded by assets seized from Delilah's operation. Property values in the area soared 60% due to heritage tourism potential. Federal oversight replaced the HOA, shielding residents from future exploitation. Media attention exploded globally. National Geographic pledged a documentary, Social media spread the story to 3.8 million shares under Thou Should Love Her serves. History trended worldwide. Environmental groups hailed our fight as the model for community-driven conservation through individual bravery. The political victory reached far beyond our town. Congress passed Sarah's Law, protecting memorial gardens nationwide from HOA interference. Amicus briefs filed with the Supreme Court reinforced property rights against overreaching private covenants. International human rights advocates adopted the case as precedent for defending burial grounds from development. Policy language crystallized. Bribery convictions would now mean 15-year minimum sentences. Corruption would cost more than compliance. Archaeological sites would hold permanent protection regardless of ownership changes. Memorial gardens gained unique recognition under global human rights law and state bereavement statutes. I stood in Sarah's garden as federal agents cuffed Delilah for the last time. The lavender-scented air mixed with ancient dust, carrying the fragrance of love, preserved through death to guard history itself. The predator was caged at last, and justice came armed with federal power. The Riverside Community Center had never seen 800 people at once, but then again, our small town had never been the focal point of an archaeological discovery destined to reshape American conservation law. Walking through the crowded hall with FBI agent Walsh at my left and Dr. Elena Rodriguez carrying evidence at my right, I felt every camera, CNN, National Geographic, 60 Minutes, documenting each step. The air was thick like summer heat before a storm. In the front row, Eleanor sat with her hands clasped in prayer, watching long-awaited justice arrive. Veterans came in full-dress uniforms to honor Sarah. Faith leaders from 7 denominations filled the reserved section, prepared to bless the moment federal law secured sacred ground forever. Then Delilah entered, no longer in designer clothes, but in a prison jumpsuit, her shackled hands glittering under studio lights. Her immaculate hair hung limp and gray, her polished nails chewed to bloody stubs. She had shifted completely, from predator to prey, destroyer to ruined utter U.S. attorney. Margaret Morin approached the podium with the weight of history in her presence. Her voice cut through the silence with federal authority that dwarfed the local politicians around her. Ladies and gentlemen, today we announce the successful prosecution of the largest organized property fraud scheme in state history, she declared as flashbulbs ignited and reporters scribbled frantically. 15 defendants faced federal RICO charges for systematic elder abuse spanning 8 years. Asset Recovery had reclaimed over $50 million from fraudulent property transfers. Delilah Thornfield faced 27 years in prison for conspiracy, arson, bribery, and interference with a protected archaeological site. The audience gasped as one, the sound like wind rushing through Sarah's memorial oak. Justice had federal teeth, and they were sinking deep. Dr. Rodriguez then took the podium, turning our neighborhood struggle into a chapter of scientific history. The Hartwell Memorial Garden, she revealed, was the longest continuously cultivated site in North American archaeology, 10,000 years of uninterrupted human presence. Indigenous tribes, colonial farmers, and modern families had all cared for this land. Sarah's memorial had preserved genetic material that survived both ice, ages, and colonial upheaval. The discovery was staggering. Seeds of 3 plant species thought extinct for half a century sprouted again from the memorial soil. Research stations in 12 countries requested genetic samples. Climate scientists hoped to develop drought-resistant crops from them, possibly feeding millions. Sarah's ashes had created mineral conditions that preserved biological wonders beyond monetary value. Love literally saved history, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice breaking with emotion. UNESCO had now granted the site permanent World Heritage designation, untouchable forever. The room fell into reverent silence. I stepped forward, holding Sarah's final letter, the one where she foresaw Delilah's scheme and required the memorial's preservation. What once looked sentimental now revealed itself as a brilliant safeguard. My wife wrote this while fighting cancer, I began, my tears blurring her handwriting. She told me, Marcus, when I'm gone, they'll try to erase what we built. But if love is planted deeply enough, its roots will last forever. Promise me you'll care for our garden. Something precious is buried there, that the world must remember. Sarah's instinct had guided us toward protection that went beyond revenge. Science proved her intuition correct. This soil held irreplaceable treasures that courage had defended against greed. Then came community testimony. 15 elderly victims recounted years of harassment that forced them into unfair property sales. Frank Morrison, a veteran who relied on his garden for PTSD therapy, wept as he recalled losing it to fabricated violations. Eleanor described watching neighbors vanish as Delilah's fraud spread like disease. Finally, Delilah demanded her turn to speak. The judge permitted her last words. What followed was her ultimate downfall. "Marcus destroyed me!" she screamed, her voice cracked by obsession. "That garden should have been mine. Sarah was supposed to vanish into nothing. I poisoned those roses. Dead people don't deserve beauty. I would have burned it all. The ashes, the memorial, every trace of love that stood in my way." Federal marshals restrained her as she lunged at the evidence table, shrieking to destroy the sacred ground. Every camera in America recorded her collapse. Her complete moral decay was broadcast live, cementing her infamy for generations. The verdict was crushing: a $1.2 million civil award, 27 years in prison, lifetime ban from property management, and forfeiture of all assets to repay victims. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, ending the storm. "Love grows eternal," I whispered, touching Sarah's plaque as the cameras caught the moment justice consecrated the ground where her ashes nurtured miracles. 6 months later, I stood again in Sarah's memorial garden, watching children plant heritage seeds at the first annual Love Grows Eternal festival. The fragrance of her favorite lavender blended with damp earth and the sweetness of cotton candy drifting from fairground stalls, shaping an atmosphere where sorrow had shifted into a tribute to life's endless renewal. Delilah was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after entering a guilty plea to avoid an even harsher term. Her partners in crime received sentences ranging between 5 and 12 years. Their fraudulent property empire collapsed entirely. The sale of seized assets produced $8.2 million in restitution, restoring stolen wealth to elderly homeowners who had lost everything through calculated exploitation. Her real estate license was revoked permanently in all 50 states, ensuring she could never again twist legal systems to prey on the vulnerable. The transformation of the memorial gardens grew far beyond the dreams Sarah and I had shared in her final months. Recognition as a federal historic landmark drew over 50,000 visitors each year, bringing $2.3 million in tourism revenue that funded new schools, senior centers, and veteran support programs. The on-site archaeological museum showcased artifacts spanning 10,000 years of cultivation, entwining our love story with humanity's deepest historical record. Scientific legacy flourished beyond imagination. University research stations released 43 peer-reviewed studies using preserved genetic samples from the memorial soil. Extinct plants revived from Sarah's garden now thrived in botanical conservatories worldwide. Climate adaptation projects developed drought-resistant crops to nourish African communities and withstand Pacific Island flooding. Sarah's ashes had literally contributed to saving lives far across the globe. Community healing turned our neighborhood into a living model of grassroots justice. Ella Lahner, unanimously elected HOA president, enacted bylaws that safeguarded vulnerable residents while advancing environmental protections. Property values rose 85% thanks to the landmark designation and positive media coverage. The annual Sarah's Garden Festival generated $300,000 for environmental education scholarships, ensuring her influence would inspire generations of young scientists. My own transformation shocked even me. With the help of grief counseling, I learned to face loss without surrendering the power of love to spark positive change. Leading the Memorial Garden as director became my calling, guiding widowed spouses through healing garden programs for trauma survivors, cancer patients, and grieving families. Sarah's belief that love grows deeper roots had become literal truth. Romance blossomed gently with Dr. Patricia Reeves, the botanist whose research saved our garden. Our bond grew like Sarah's roses, carefully nurtured, deeply grounded, honoring what came before while welcoming new growth. Sarah would have admired Patricia's quiet strength and her devotion to safeguarding the diversity of life. Congress passed Federal Sarah's Law with bipartisan support, shielding memorial gardens nationwide from HOA harassment. 28. States followed with bereavement protection laws. The Supreme Court recognized memorial rights as fundamental to human dignity, protected under civil rights law. Legal experts declared it the most significant property rights victory in half a century. Financial impact stretched far beyond basic needs into the realm of legacy. A trust generated $65,000 annually for garden upkeep and education programs. Tourism funded an endowment surpassing $5 million for environmental research. Rising property values established generational wealth to sustain conservation long after my lifetime. Settlement funds also supported advocacy programs for elderly Americans facing institutional abuse. Sarah's foundation awarded 127 environmental science scholarships to underprivileged students, realizing her dream of education based on merit, not wealth. Garden therapy programs aided more than 800 veterans each year, offering PTSD treatment through reconnection with living systems. Research collaborations advanced conservation on 6 continents. Love itself had shaped global environmental policy. Vision of the future extended far beyond personal justice into systemic transformation. Archaeological excavation would continue for 15 years with international teams. A National Geographic documentary earned 3 Emmy Awards and prompted congressional hearings on HOA reform. Tourism projections promised sustainable growth that would support our town for generations. UNESCO unanimously declared Sarah's Memorial Garden a World Heritage Site, placing it alongside Stonehenge and the pyramids as priceless human heritage. The inscription read, "This site shows how personal love can preserve collective memory, proving that courage guided by wisdom shapes history beyond immediate understanding." At sunset, by Sarah's Memorial Fountain, I watched Patricia teaching children about seed preservation as veterans found peace among the heritage roses. I felt Sarah's presence alive in everything she had helped protect. The bronze plaque glowed in the evening light. Love grows eternal. Sarah and Marcus forever. Sarah had taught me that love never dies. To the documentary cameras I said, "It only sends down deeper roots and bears fruit that nourishes the world." Love had conquered everything. Another day, another HOA showdown closed. If this story made you laugh, cheer, or shake your head, hit that like button, drop your own HOA story in the comments, and subscribe.